John, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge. Pleasure to be with you.
We just watched terrible street scenes, which if I didn't tell you was Oakland, California, you might think was Athens, Greece, or even Cairo, Egypt. Burning, smashing, looting, and destroying. Is that what protest has come to here? And before you answer, I think you and I agree. We defend to the death the right of protesters to say what they want, to assemble peaceably, and to demand redress from the government. But do we defend their right to occupy and destroy private property?
Absolutely not. And I don't think it's surprising that the protesters have become violent, because they really don't know what they're protesting. They're really just against our current society. In fundamental ways, they're against individual rights and free markets and economic freedom. And if they really understood what they were protesting, they'd be in Washington, D.C., not Oakland or Wall Street, because crony capitalism is only possible when the government doles out favors. In fact, crony capitalism is...
Sometimes the government doesn't bail out favors. Sometimes the government even forces favors upon banks and other financial institutions that don't even want them. You yourself experienced that as the chair of, I think, the 19th largest bank in the country.
That's true, Judge. They want to control business. Unfortunately, we've moved a lot towards statism, and the government doesn't want to be responsible for owning business in the traditional socialist sense. But that's much more like a national socialism, where they control through the back room. And if they give you money, whether you want it or not, then they use that as an excuse to control your activities. You know, if you want to control economic...
I wish that the protesters could hear you. I can't envision you down there in Lower Manhattan, but I wish that they could hear you, because their complaints should be directed at the governments that did this, as well as at the banks that received it.
Absolutely, Judge, because if we had separation of business and state, like we have of church and state, this wouldn't be possible. If the government couldn't dole out favors, then businesses wouldn't be able to get those favors. And I don't defend the businesses, because I think crony capitalism is one of the worst enemies of free markets and a free society. But on the other hand, the capitalists wouldn't be there asking for what's called rents in economic terms if the government didn't give them the money. I want
to change the subject. Excuse me for cutting you off before we before we leave, John, to go to the next guest. The president is suggesting that the government somehow has the power to modify terms of mortgages, that for people who can't pay back money they've borrowed from a bank to buy their house, somehow the government will come in and alter the relationship between the borrower and the lender. And the president claims that will save mortgages. You have a different view of that, don't you?
That is a massive redistribution of wealth from banks and their shareholders, and eventually their clients who will have to pay from that, to borrowers that are underwater. It is not true that there's no cost to doing that, because these bonds that are backing these mortgages will be refinanced at lower interest rates, and the people that own the bonds, and that could be a pension plan, could be some of your viewers' pension plan that'll have less income than it would have had the government not changed these rules. So that's just a redistribution of wealth.
Got it. John Allison, it's a pleasure as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.
Tonight, will democracy die in the place where it was born? Greece's socialist prime minister said he'll throw out his plans